Welcome to the Union Federation podcast, where we discuss both Star Trek and the Orville here on the Fandom Podcast Network. This week, we are discussing Star Trek Picard, Season 3, Episode 9, Vox. And before we go any further, that's right, spoiler alert, guys. And as we know, our crew likes to let you know, and this might have been his last order. We'll find out. Spoiler alert for Mr. Shaw here. But first, I would like to introduce the rest of my crew. I am Kevin. I am your captain. And with me, as always, is my security and weapons officer, Mr. Kyle Wagner. What's up, buddy?
Well, I haven't been as always of late, thanks to this special assignment you guys gave me. You guys know I'm sick of Planet Taxium at this point. It's rough, man.
Take it and like it.
but Kevin, wait. I'm getting some breaking news here. Apparently, there's been a Fandom Podcast Network trade. The Union Federation has acquired a lightsaber, a hyperdrive, and there's something else being thrown in. And all we send over. No, I don't know. But all we had to send over was a box of tribbles.
All right. Well, I think we have a guest ambassador from our other show here. What a Piece of Junk. Let's get him over here. Mr. Scott Botman from What's Up?
Howdy, guys. I will quote Neelix here. I am at your disposal, as always, and I've come to teach you how to use that lightsaber and hyperdrive, because I think over here you guys don't really know how the space wizard stuff works, right?
That's right. You are our special guest here, and Kyle, he is from our other show in the network here, the Fandom Podcast Network. Scott, you are with us from What a Piece of Junk, our Star Wars podcast.
That's right. And it's my pleasure to come talk about Star Trek. Kevin and I have been Star Trek friends for a long, long time because he used to play the Star Trek card game with us and, of course, help do all of our events and stuff, because I know him from all the way back when he worked at Decipher, the company that made the Star Trek and Star Wars card games, among other games.
Good times, man. Good times. Well,
yeah.
We know this. Scott has come to the much cleaner ship because I've seen the shape of the Drunken Guggen over at What a Piece of Junk. The cleanliness and beautiful carpet of the Union Federation.
Beautiful carpet. The carpet is very alluring. I should be all offended and make some sort of retort, but it's true. It's all true.
Well, Haley and Amy couldn't be with us this week, but we got our guys here. And Scott, I just had a question. If you were to jump on the Enterprise D, what station would you go to immediately besides the captain's chair?
If I were to jump on the Enterprise D as myself, like somehow time warped from the 21st century, I would head directly to the holodeck to get into all kinds of trouble, because how awesome is that thing? I wouldn't be on duty at all. I'd be like, cool, so in the future you don't have money, so this is free, right? Let's do it.
That's awesome. I love that. Well, this week, as I mentioned, we are discussing Star Trek Picard, Season 3, Episode 9, Vox. Some funky stuff is going on here, guys, and we'll get into first reactions. But first, we're going to get into the Admiral's log, and I'll go ahead and read that this week. So beware. All right. Troy realizes Jack is connected to the Borg, the source of all the voices he hears. Jack takes off to deal with them, resulting in his capture by the Borg Queen. As the Titan races to the Starfleet anniversary celebrations above Earth, Data, Geordi, and Beverly finally discover why the rogue changelings stole Picard's corpse. They were working with the Borg. The changelings copied Picard's Borg-altered DNA and tricked the transporters into implanting the alterations in all users, effective in those parietal lobes. There we go. That are still developing until age 25 in humans. Picard informs fellow Admiral Shelby of the developments, but it is too late, as the Borg trigger the entire fleet's assimilation, including Geordi's daughters, and kill Shelby. Seven remains immune to the assimilation signal. Shaw sacrifices himself to defend the Titan from the Borg and hands over command to Seven, who remains behind with Raffi. Geordi leads the crew via shuttlecraft to the Starfleet Museum, where he reveals that he secretly rebuilt the Enterprise D after its destruction. It is now the only operable starship without Borg-designed swarm intelligence enhancements. The Enterprise crew press their back in. The Enterprise's old crew presses her back into service to save the Federation from the Borg. To be continued. All right, guys. A lot in that. Scott, you're our special guest here. Your first reactions to this episode.
Well, first of all, getting to see the Enterprise D flying around again was amazing. But I also really enjoyed that it wasn't the only Enterprise in this episode. We did see the Enterprise F come sailing out of Starbase One. And I'm a little concerned about the future of Starbase One, but we'll get to that later. I think that just overall, the idea that the Borg is the major enemy on Picard's final season, while somewhat carbon copy, because the Borg were a big deal last season in Picard. But it's almost like Shaw said a few episodes ago, I don't care what happened at that sector with the new Borg Queen. The evil Borg, the real Borg, are still out there, and we need to be worried about them. Shaw said all this when he was in 10 Forward hologram simulation, complaining about Locutus's history. It was almost like the writers had been foreshadowing the Borg as the main problem, but foreshadowing in a good way, not in a ham-fisted way, so that some people were still rather surprised to see that enormous Borg cube sort of resting in Jack's subconscious. I also really enjoyed the bit of an Easter egg there, jumping the gun on Easter eggs a little, but that Borg cube was a very Voyager-esque era Borg cube. Much more menacing than what we saw in the original Next Generation, in certainly terrifying. But seeing the crew back on board the Enterprise D, having Picard mention how much he missed the carpet, such a great episode. It's not a perfect episode, of course. It's not going to be something that I point to like I do Best of Both Worlds when it comes to the artistry of Trek. But as a part of this series of Picard, it's probably right up there in my top 3 favorite episodes of all of Picard across all seasons.
Well said. Kyle, I wanted to just mention real quick, this is directed by Terry Matalas, and the writing credits go to Sean Tretta and Kylie Rosetta. Now, I had a little short discussion with you, Kyle, because I teared up several times while I was watching this episode, and you said no because you're dead inside. So your first reaction to this episode?
Well, I might not be entirely popular by the time I was giving my first reactions to this episode, because there's things I love. The Enterprise, everything with the Enterprise D, it does hit all the feels, even though I didn't cry. But Kevin has to realize I am dead inside right now because I've been on Planet Taxium for so long. But
Planet Taxium sounds like just the world's most horrible nightmare spheroid. I mean, wow.
Or anyway, it's probably the pleasure planet for Ferengis.
Oh, no.
It's one and the same.
As a hardcore Ferengi fan back in the day, no, because Ferengi hate taxes and audits. You know how pissed off Quark was about the FCA? He was like, these people shouldn't be allowed to exist.
Well, the people that work for the FCA probably enjoy Planet Taxium, so yeah. Probably their home planet. All right, sorry, Kyle. You said you were just about to become unpopular. Go ahead.
I love everything with the Enterprise D, getting everybody together, all the feels, being on that moment on them on the bridge. But I really wish it was something other than the Borg.
I feel you.
I feel like we've been cycling through the Borg since season 1 of Picard, and I guess it makes sense in that aspect. But there were so many things from Next Generation that they could have done and used in here that were going to be different. And to use the Borg again is just I understand it and I respect it, but I just wish they could have done something a little different. And I got to say this too, the utter stupidity of Starfleet at this point is epically bad. Let's combine it so all of our ships are interconnected.
Okay, hold on. What if it was someone infiltrated that started that program so this could eventually all happen?
Yeah, like some kind of sabotage, if you were.
Yeah.
I can see that.
But I figured that's part of it. But still, you would think Starfleet has it. There's enough high level Starfleet officers within Starfleet who have had experience with Borg going, this kind of seems familiar.
Well, even Riker said that Shelby doing such a Borg-like thing made no sense to him.
Yeah. So, and especially because, I'm going to say it. We've had that one dangling plot line from Star Trek The Next Generation that was never resolved about a certain alien infiltration into Starfleet.
The Bluegills.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And what if you're going to end Picard on a high note? Why not finish by answering that unanswered question?
That's a good point, Kyle. I see it, and that is a valid gripe. I'm going to counter it and think this. Now, yes, Borg. We've had the dealing with the Borg before, and we've had the Romulans before. But I think Star Trek gets interesting when you combine the temporary truce, not always, stable between two of the Federation's enemies, like we had in with the Dominion and the Cardassians and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And for a race to pull off what they're doing with these ships and all this type of thing, it's really only the Borg that could pull it off. And the Borg and the Changeling, that makes a very, very interesting foe for the Federation. And how they're going to wrap this up in one episode, I have no idea. Maybe they won't. Maybe that's something they're going to try to, the struggle is going to continue against the Federation being infiltrated. We'll see about that, depending on how badass they get with the Enterprise D. I thought that I wasn't surprised that the Borg was brought in, because I was kind of having Borgy feelings prior to seeing this episode about what was happening and why someone would be so fixated on Picard, and because of Locutus and his history with that. And and this is a Picard show. This isn't a Star Trek like everyone else show. This is a Picard thing. So it would have to kind of go back to him. But Kyle, I still want to find out what happened with the Bluegills. Maybe that'll come up another time. Let's put a pin in that, because that is, ever since we've been playing that card game, Scott, that's been annoying the hell out of me.
Yep. Can I interject one more thing because of what we had in this episode? If we are going this Borg direction, a certain doctor who went through a change in Picard season 2 really could be a way out of some of this mess.
Well, there's still one more episode, Kyle. Who knows?
That's what I'm saying.
Girardi, right? You're talking about
Girardi.
Yeah.
And Girardi was almost name checked by Shaw earlier in this season of Picard when he mentioned, all that stuff that happened with the other Borg. I mean, so it's clear that, they're aware of that. And that might be what happens. And I think that'd be a nice way to put a bow on it for this series, because a lot of people seem to be acting like season 3 of Picard is its own thing, and it's not going to mention any stuff that happened in season 1 or 2. But that's already been, disproven, because they've talked often about Picard's artificial body.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to get you guys' thoughts on some of the guest stars we had here in cast. And of course, the most notable one is the return of Elizabeth Shelby. And of course, we remember her from the 2-part episode of Best of Both Worlds, where she challenged Riker. And this is the first time she's come back. She's done a lot of convention appearances, and she is back doing her thing. And what's interesting too, and I'm gonna jump just a little bit to some information I got out of this week's The Radio Room with Will Wheaton. She and Elizabeth Dennehy, who plays Elizabeth Shelby, were guests with Will Riker's Jonathan Frakes' Will Riker. And I found out that Shelby didn't have a first name at all when she was cast, and that Elizabeth name kind of just came later. They decided to give her real first name. So I thought that was interesting. But Scott, I want to go to you. We got Shelby back.
Yeah, I knew that Shelby was going to be in the episode. I don't know where I saw that tidbit, but nobody had said that it was necessarily going to be played by the same actress. And so I was happy to see that they went ahead and had the same actress come back instead of recasting. I thought there was a chance that instead of Shelby sitting in the chair giving the command on Frontier Day, it would have been the blonde admiral from Picard season 1 that accused him of having such sheer effing hubris. But I was glad to see that it wasn't her, and that it was in fact the real Elizabeth Shelby, if you were. And it was so cool to have Riker make that little comment about the fleet interconnectivity and how strangely Borg-like that was for a woman who was supposedly an expert on combating the Borg. And I really wanted to see a scene of her and Riker meeting again face to face as they're trying to save the day, and him asking her, "Yo, Liz, what the heck, babe?" But I don't think that's happening, because I believe that she is dead. Spoiler alert abounds. Because we saw the heartbreaking moment of her trying to talk to Admiral Picard, and when she's all like, "What are you talking about? Somebody help!" And then, so-and-so, Lieutenant so-and-so, what are you doing? Blam, you're dead. Yeah. Which, can we talk for a second about how weird it is? I mean, I get the whole concept of only the young people are being affected, but normally the Borg don't just incinerate people like that. Once they have them helpless, they assimilate them. Why did they not try to assimilate Admiral Shelby?
Let's get into that when we get into the whole master plan next segment for the away mission, because that is a great question.
It struck me as odd. I was like, wait a minute. All these young Borglings are killing people. This doesn't seem right. Anyway,
I wanted to give Kyle a shot, first of all, to discuss the return of Shelby.
It's one of the things that has been so great about this season is they picked the right moments to bring familiar faces back, and they did it again with how they did with Shelby. Wasn't expecting it. Very cool that she's on the Enterprise F, and she was always going to be one of those ones that was going to be high in the ranking of Starfleet before it was all said and done anyway. So it was cool to see that character back, and it's like I said, I think it's something that season 3 of Picard has just nailed across the board, is bringing in the familiar faces at the right time to give us those moments as Next Generation fans to meet our expectations. When it's all said and done, Kevin, we can, unless something happens drastically in the season finale, Star Trek Picard season 3 is going to be the model of how to properly pay respects to where you came from. And it should be like, this is the textbook example of it.
I had a good friend of mine within the Star Wars 501st say the same thing, because there's a lot of my fellow 501st that are huge Star Trek fans. And he said the exact same thing that you just said there, Kyle. And he went into a breakdown of what Terry Matalas has done right, and how if you want to do a reunion, if you want to bring people back, there's certain things and certain notes that you need to do. And that's, I'm going to say it. That was my big issue with the sequel trilogy. They did not do that correctly. And this is a great way to show, as you mentioned in a post, Scott, that you mentioned there was a lot of fan service in this. And of course, fan service has had a negative connotation for many years. But for me, I think fan service done in the right way is a great way. And this is the ultimate fan service, because I think also it's the ultimate tribute. And I think there's a difference there. I didn't know if you wanted to go a little bit further on that, Scott, of how you had mentioned that on social media.
Yeah, so I agree with you that fan service isn't always a bad thing. It's a bad thing when you do it and it draws too much attention to it. Like, hey, look, fans, we put this character here in this situation because we know you all were daydreaming about it. Because it has its origins in a bit more of a, shall we say, softcore kind of idea, where everybody was like, fan service because we got to see whoever this babe was in some scantily clad outfit for no apparent reason. A good example of new century bad fan service was in Star Trek Into Darkness, when they had the Admiral's daughter changing clothes, and Kirk was in the shuttlecraft and he got to see her, and she's like, hey, stop looking at me. There was no reason to put that scene in the film other than to have us, be able to say, ooh.
The other one I've heard too was in Rogue One, when you saw Dr. Evazan and Ponda Baba.
Yeah. It's like there's no reason for them to be on Jeddah.
It was fine with me, but I understand why people says that's
and that's what I'm saying. When
Yeah.
fan service happens, if you're real hardcore fans, you're just like, okay, this was fun. I mean, it doesn't make any sense to other people who aren't as big a fan, but
but showing it and building on it's a different thing, I think.
Yeah. And so in this instance, in Picard, the episode Vox, definitely fan service for the Enterprise D, but yet it was written in such a way that it was important to have a ship that was old school and not connected to the new system, and so on and so forth. And I also felt it was a little fan servicey with the Borg super secret code is only affecting young people, because that gives us a in-universe reason for all these, let's be honest, old people to save the day because they haven't been assimilated.
I need to ask you guys a question because this was going through my mind. Someone, I forget who it was on social media last week, said, I bet those ships at Daystrom Institute are going to come back to play in one way or another. They didn't. They were saving the surprise for Enterprise D. But wouldn't it have been kind of cool to maybe like have someone just go to the USS Bounty and fly that thing around as backup, maybe? Just say,
either way, I'm gonna. Who says that we aren't going to get there yet? There's got to be survivors from this battle and other people who escaped that Picard could say, well, we got some extra ships back there that, might be able to help out a little bit. Who wouldn't want to see maybe a quick appearance by some Voyager crew back on the Voyager, maybe 7 on the Voyager,
or hopefully the real Tuvok is alive somewhere and they could get him to help out.
I hope he's got like a long ass white beard and he's just
bearded Vulcan.
Come on. Who also wouldn't want a quick moment of Worf captaining the Defiant once again too?
That's true. Awesome too.
That's true. Anyway.
Yeah.
All right, guys, let's go ahead and get into our first away mission. All right, guys.
Kevin, you can stop teleporting us. It's coming in effect.
It's my master plan.
Hey, Kyle, don't worry. We are all way past the expiration date for that code. We're good, man.
Well, no. Kevin wrote this code, so it's definitely the old man code.
You will all be mine. All right, guys. Our first topic is, and I want to come back to you with this, Scott, because you had some questions about this, is the Borg and Changelings unite. Jack escapes to the Borg Queen, or pulled towards it. Picard's Borg altered DNA in the transporter system. They've all been assimilating the entire fleet. And yes, they target the 25-year-olds or younger. A lot to kind of chew on this, guys. And I thought it was a clever way to introduce the Borg and their master plan. The plan to have all of the ships, yes, it's an easy target now, but to have all of the ships united into one single brain seemed like a good idea, but there's one race that knows how to exploit that, and maybe they were the ones that introduced it, unknowing to the leaders of Starfleet. But I thought it was pretty interesting, and I'm not surprised that the Borg Queen is back. We had, of course, some Borgen stuff going on last season with Girardi and the Borg Queen. Rest in peace, Annie Wershing. But we also got to see some great ships, but we kind of get to see what the big plan is here. And Scott, I want to give you the floor to kind of dive a little bit deeper into what you were just teasing us with.
So, we all have theorized for, well, let's be honest, decades now about what would happen if the changelings from Deep Space Nine met up with the Borg, especially the Borg from Star Trek Voyager. Would the nanoprobes and all that rigmarole have any effects on the changelings that can alter their physiology at will, right? We kind of saw a little hint about how this would go when the Borg had to deal with species 8472 on Star Trek Voyager, a biomimetic species, that could change their shapes and all, and not quite as much of shapeshifters as the changelings, but still the point was the Borg couldn't deal with those guys, and so that was when we had them have to cut a deal with Voyager to figure out a way around the problem in fluidic space. But here we have the Borg have done what they always do. They've adapted, they have changed, they have evolved so that now they don't need nanoprobes and all that stuff. They're doing biological assimilation or chemical assimilation, as it were, which I think is going to turn out to be key as to how they got the changelings to work for them. Because if we've watched Vadic talking to the Face on her ship back in the day on these episodes earlier this season of Picard, it wasn't really a partnership. She was kind of telling Vadic what to do and making her do it. I think that it's an interesting idea there of the Borg have changed the way that they assimilate you. So now it's biological, not cybernetic per se. And I'm wondering if, Kevin, this is some reason why they've decided that now we also have an age cutoff as to when we're going to and how we're going to assimilate people. Although I also want to know a little bit more about that age cutoff because it's affecting crew members of Starfleet of all kinds of alien races, not just humans. And, different races mature at different rates and so on and so forth. So like the Bajoran crew member that gets assimilated, is he the same basic chronological age as Geordi's daughters? How is this going to affect Vulcans who live a lot longer than humans? What about Trill, who have multiple consciousnesses in the same body if you're joined with a symbiote, etc., etc.? This is great, very well fertilized ground for future Star Wars stories, novels and comic books. I'm thinking maybe video games that deal with this concept of when the biological Borg started their attack on Frontier Day. Also, hat tip to the writers for Frontier Day, because we can also get a Star Trek Enterprise reference as we're awash with all this nostalgia.
The biological attack on this, I think, was key that you just brought up there, Scott, that not only are they evolving themselves, but they're evolving on how to attack this. And I think that's great.
Yeah.
Kyle, your thoughts on the Borg plan here?
Well, first of all, anybody who had their bet in at minute 26 that Scott would say Star Wars instead of Star Trek.
Darn it.
I think it's a very cool concept, but I agree with Scott in the aspect of they're asking the viewer to take a pretty big logic leap, because you have all these different alien races that are all different DNA and how they develop and everything like that. So yeah, it's one of those things, and I think it's something in sci-fi that happens a lot, where we just kind of put our own human basis on something and just say it applies to everything. So I'm curious to see if they will address that in the season finale. But as far as how the Borg advancing and changing, it's something that is the thing that is the fear factor of the Borg, is how they change, how they evolve. And here they're going with a more biological type attack. Now, I think the interesting aspect of this is we saw a different Borg last season with Girardi turning into the Borg Queen and what that version of the Borg turned into. Now we have this version of the Borg that is Jack, who, let's be honest here, this is going to be interesting in the aspect of the Borg using more biologic is kind of a grand experiment for them. And it's their own little Frankenstein's monster experiment. And could it turn on them? And I think that's a very interesting aspect of it as well. But to add in the fact that this is a 35-year plan, that this started with Locutus and has developed this time, and they were able to hide it well enough as technology advanced that it didn't get detected. So it's interesting, and it's what makes the Borg scary as far as that aspect of it goes. Now they're using biologic instead of technology. But again, there's a little bit more of this that needs to be fleshed out for me. And I'm very curious to see if we're going to get some more of that explanation in the season finale.
You said fleshed out.
Yes.
All right, y'all overthinking this. Technobabble, blah, blah, blah.
Probably.
Borg are bad. Teaming up with other bad changelings. That's all I need to know, guys. That's all I need to know.
Okay, Kevin, if Haley was here, what would you be hearing right now?
Well, she would do her little thing, and that's fine. And I think actually Scott did a great job getting into the science of that, and that's fine. Mm-hmm. But questioning it, I'm going to be okay with not questioning it personally. I think that they did a great job to make someone like me, who does not have a degree in science and is not an accomplished writer, make me believe that, okay, that works for me. So I'm just going to say, to me, I'm more of a visual and audio guy. And when they can make it sound, and to kind of dive into that a little bit, it was great to see Beverly, Geordi, and all the other minds of the original Enterprise D hashing this out together and both spitting out these lines putting the puzzle pieces together. And it was also nostalgia in a way of how close they were and how they always had moments to work off and bounce off of each other and solve these problems. And, even the moment where, Geordi's first reaction is to run to his assimilated daughters, and Data just stops him going, "What are you going to do? We need to handle, we need to get out of here and fix this, but I do appreciate the questioning of the science of all of this. Maybe that will be fleshed out and it will make it even more interesting, diabolical, plan, and see how deep that it goes, because have it just being the Borg Queen makes me wonder if there's still something else there that we don't know. But the big question is how are they going to get out of it? And what does the Enterprise D have left in her in this? And we'll get into the Enterprise D a little bit later. Trust me, guys. Kyle?
I do have one thing we haven't mentioned this yet, and I feel like this is an appropriate time because we're talking about the biologicals and things like that. How ironic is it that Seven's calling Data a robot?
Yes, that was great. That was so great. And now that Data has feelings, he gave her that look like, "Hey, what the?"
That stung. That stung, Seven. Come on.
Yeah,
got feelings now. That is funny. That is a good one.
No, I love your point though, Kevin, about watching Dr. Crusher, Geordi, and Data like do a science thing where they all work it out together and figure out what the Borg are up to, like old days past, right? Because it's the light side version. I'm gonna do some more Star Wars here. It's the light side version of working together as a collective of equally respected individuals versus the dark side version of a collective from the Borg itself, where everyone is subsumed to the main ideas and there is no individuality, right? And so each of them have their moments of efficiency.
And one of the things that I've always enjoyed about that is, and it's what we really have to give writers like yourself, Scott, and screenwriters a lot of extra credit on this, and the creative people behind this, being able to put together how our heroes are going to get out of this, and the problem solving. Because what's nice about being a viewer and a fan is you can just sit back, feel like you're part of the crew, but realizing that the smarter members of the crew are going to take care of it for you. And so, but there was a lot of really good moments in this. And when it comes to this whole Borg and Changeling thing, and I'm hoping we get a little feedback with it, but I'm just going to throw this out at you. I keep saying this. I hope that this threat doesn't end with this season. I want to see this, like, we got to handle this. We still got a problem here, guys. Yes, we've stopped this particular threat and blah, 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 but they're still out there. And I would love it if somehow that they were to either entertain the idea of a new show handling this time frame, because this is the time frame I've really wanted to see. I didn't want to see the 900 years or 400 years in the future that Discovery gave us. I want to see what happens sometime after Picard, sometime after Voyager and Deep Space Nine. I really want to see where that Federation goes. And I want to see how they are handling the situations with their old enemies, and maybe old enemies becoming new allies. That could be kind of fun too. Where are the Cardassians at, Kyle?
I was just going to say, Kevin, I know what you need. You need Star Trek Legacy Season 1, The Search for Jack Crusher.
Yeah. I wouldn't mind seeing, Tosk. What happened to Tosk? Let's get Tosk back. Just saying.
Yeah.
Here he's been hanging around on Earth a lot. So, all right, guys, we have to get into our next mission. Rest in peace. Moment of silence. Captain Shaw. All right, Scott, there was a meme I reshared last week, I think it was, where it said, episode 1, who is this jackass? Episode 7, if they kill him off, we're going to sue Paramount, blah, blah, blah. We joked
Right,
about it last episode. Damn it, Scott, they killed him.
They did. It's terrible. A few seconds, I'm not kidding, a few seconds before this happened, as they were involved in the firefight, my wife Mita leaned over to me, and my beautiful bride goes, if they kill Captain Grumpy Pants, I'm going to be really, really angry. And not just like 30 seconds later, he turns around, he's yelling at all the old people, go, go, go. And he gets shot and he dies. And she's all, I can't believe I spoke that into existence. I'm so mad at these writers. And so, we had a moment of silence, pour one out for Captain Shaw, Captain Grumpy Pants, as we affectionately called him.
I love that, Scott. Captain Grumpy Pants. I love it.
Yeah, and I'm just like, this is such great writing. As a writer, I was so impressed. As a fan, I was so angry because they had made me care about him, and then they made me like him. I went from just, oh, what a tool, to, well, he has a few good points, to, he's an honorable dude in his own way, to, oh, this guy is a linchpin to the success. When he did that whole plasma induction stuff with the warp nacelles and his grease monkey past, I loved, he had such great metaphors, and he was one of those almost everyman characters that we love on Star Trek that will anchor us, the current viewer, to the future. Because like Han Solo was in Star Wars, right? It's like, I can't understand what it's like to be a Jedi, but I can get this guy who loves his hot rod and monkeys with it with his dog, right? And so same deal with Shaw. I'm not super keen on being an android or how warp drives work, but watching this dude talk about being an old grease monkey who got promoted through the ranks of the Navy, I mean, that makes perfect sense. Plus, if I had to deal with all the crap that a Star Trek Starfleet officer has to deal with on a regular basis, I might be kind of grumpy and upset when I had to deal with people coming and taking over my ship too, especially if they wouldn't tell me what they really wanted to do, and I could tell it was super obvious that they were lying to me. But yeah, and now he has a hero's death where he protects all of our main characters, and then finally has respect for 7 of 9 when he clearly didn't earlier in the season.
Scott, one of the things you just said reminded me of one of my favorite moments with Shaw, that he's an old grease monkey and he geeks out when he meets Geordi. I thought that was really funny.
That was great.
And the thing, and you kind of touched on it, Scott, but the thing that's great about Shaw is I feel like he's our proxy. He's saying stuff that we would say if we were a captain. Stuff like, does anybody want to throw some more weird shit at us? Like, you would never hear a captain of any Star Trek thing say that. And he says what's on his mind. He's very blunt, and I absolutely love it. His diplomacy isn't that great, I guess you could say.
He's diplomacy -1.
Yes, exactly. But that's what we like about it. Maybe that's what he would let 7 do, but I mean, I would love to see him deal with some Ferengis on a Ferengi Marauder, or see what, he would do. But yes, I'm still not over it. And I did want to mention too, I think it's either Twitter or TikTok. Todd Stashwick did a little tribute to what I think as a thank you to fans in a very humorous way. He is drinking a red shirt mug of tea of something, and he downs it. He looks straight in the camera, and then he kind of turns around and walks out, and he's, I'm out. He was basically saying, as fans, what we are thinking. And from what I've heard, he's really cool with the fans, and he's a really funny guy and a big nerd himself. Kyle, your thoughts on the last breath of Shaw?
Kevin, I'm so disappointed in you.
Here we go.
As people who grew up in the 80s, and any writer who's grew up in the 80s, when it comes to the death of a certain character, there are 5 very important words to remember, Kevin. Duke,
I know where you're going with
coma.
Say that again. I talked over you.
Duke is in a coma.
Yep.
But he was shot in the shoulder. It wasn't in the chest. It was in the shoulder.
I don't know. He looked like he was in. I don't know, man. I don't know.
But we have this heroic moment. Raffi and 7 are still trapped on the Titan with all these Borg, pinned down, trapped. And who comes to save them? A Shaw who has managed to not recover from his injuries, but realize he just passed out, slipped into a short coma, and rescues Raffi.
He's in a G.I. Joe Duke coma. Let's hope that happens.
Yeah. I mean, if Duke can survive a cobra to the heart, I'm just saying.
Take that, Cobra Borg. Oh man, Cobra Borg. I gotta start writing that fanfic. Anyway, I actually like Kyle's idea here because if there's one Star Trek character who you want to have right next to you when you get blasted, it's 7 of 9. Her blood still has Borg nanoprobes in it. She's used them to save people's lives before. I mean, who knows? We could easily have her. Like, I quickly injected him with my nanoprobes, and they reconstituted.
Well, I mean,
him.
but how fitting would it be to have Shaw's life saved by Borg technology with
by
all
Borg
this season?
By Borg by 7 of 9. Like when he comes out of it, he'll be all like, "Wait, how am I alive?" And then she smiles at him, and he goes, "Oh, son of a."
Oh man, yeah, this is one of my favorite Star Trek new characters in a long time, and I had a feeling it was going to happen, but I just man, like I said, he's one of those characters that I think that needs to live on and maybe help deal with this problem in the future. Maybe they'll save him. I don't know. Of course, Borg have brought people back from the dead before. Especially if you read or listen to the Shatnerverse.
but now, Kevin, too. Who else but Todd is going to play into this 100% and put out a TikTok video knowing, I'm going to make him really think I'm gone.
Yeah, Todd would definitely be that. Definitely. All right, now normally
this is why you guys have me on this episode to bring a Star Wars perspective, because I mean, this is super easy. Somehow Captain Shaw returned. Okay, we're done.
Oh, you went there.
Yep.
Hold on. Well played, Scott. Well played. I love it. All right, guys. Now, normally we do have another topic, but we're going to save that for our final away mission. And that, of course, is the Enterprise D. We're going to get into that. But first, we have some Star Trek trivia. All right, guys. So I found some Star Trek trivia, and I want to get your guys' thoughts on it. And also, if you have any other Easter eggs or trivia yourself that you want to throw out there. So, all right. Scott, are you laughing at our eggs, our Star Trek eggs?
I like the Easter eggs in there. Hey, Easter eggs. Good times. All
right. A number of the starships present at Frontier Day have engaged the Borg in the past. The USS Thunderchild, the NCC 63549, was present for the Battle of Sector 001 in Star Trek First Contact in 1996, and several other ships, including USS Akira, USS Clark, USS Excelsior, USS Luna, USS Akuta, USS Reliant, USS Sutherland, and the USS Venture were part of the armada that faced the Borg Singularity vessel in Star Trek Picard. Stargazer. The trivia, by the way, Majel Barrett was the voice of the computer of the Enterprise D, where Admiral Picard commanded the reactivation of all systems. Guys, how cool was that? We got Majel her voice back.
That was epic.
You had to. There's no other thing to do.
I love that. That was great. Geordi mentions the drive section of the rebuilt Enterprise D was salvaged from the USS Syracuse. The Syracuse had only briefly been mentioned in the past. A notation in the personal file of Enterprise engineering crewman 4th class Alphonse Pacelli indicated that he has served on the Syracuse before being transferred to the USS Enterprise in Star Trek The Next Generation, Eye of the Beholder, 1994. So do we know if the Syracuse was damaged somewhere, guys, like in a battle, and they were able to save the nacelles? Or
I think it was just decommissioned, and Geordi pulled some strings to get them.
It's Geordi. When Geordi wants something, he'll get something. That's just the bottom line of it.
That's true.
He went on Star Trek eBay, and he was collecting all the hot rod parts for rebuilding his classic starship there.
Did you guys wonder, like, in that scene though, if why we didn't get mentions of who was driving the Enterprise D at the time?
I really wanted that joke about nobody let Deanna drive this version, but it didn't happen. That's probably for the best. But she was making sure that Worf would be more respectful of Geordi's hard work, because I love the part where Worf says, "I preferred the weapon systems on board the E," and she's like, "Worf, come on, Geordi worked hard on this."
That was funny. Little ship. When Riker steps onto the bridge of the USS Enterprise D, he says, "Is the bridge smaller or am I just bigger?" In Star Trek Generations 1994, the bridge set was modified to be wider. But in this episode, the bridge returns to its original specifications from Star Trek The Next Generation. We're going to get more into that. First appearance of Elizabeth Denny since Star Trek The Next Generation, Best of Both Worlds 2. Picard says he can hear the Borg even after being de-assimilated. This was shown in an early scene in Star Trek First Contact, 1996, when Picard can hear them in close proximity to the Borg cube. And this is the first appearance of the USS Enterprise D since Star Trek Generations 1994. Scott, was there any other Easter eggs or any comments on these trivia items here you wanted to mention?
Well, you mentioned a long litany of ships that had fought the Borg, and then we're now here at Frontier Day. And of course, one of them is its own Easter egg, the USS Okuda, named after Michael and Denise Okuda, Star Trek special effects gurus from days of yore who still work on the shows. And Michael Okuda posted on his Facebook feed earlier this week saying how much fun it was to see the USS Okuda back in action alongside several other Easter egg names of vessels that I have not memorized, but are named after other crew members and various other production types that have worked on Star Trek for a long, long time. And of course, the whole idea of, look, there's an Easter egg on that computer display is a big time Star Trek tradition nowadays. So yeah, it was pretty cool. But, you know, Kevin, you were talking about Easter eggs and callbacks. We mentioned earlier in this podcast about the Changelings and the Borg working together, and you think it's cool when two Star Trek villains team up. And that itself is a Star Trek tradition going all the way back to when the Romulans and the Klingons worked together to have a technology exchange in the 1960s original series, which was at the time just a, budgetary constraint thing so they could reuse the models of the Klingon ships. They just repainted them. But it was a cool idea that they gave it an in-universe real, reasoning of the technology exchange treaty between the Roms and the Klingons.
And I did mention the Shatnerverse because it's kind of a guilty pleasure for me where after Generations, the Borg got an alliance with the Romulans and exhumed Captain Kirk's body and reanimated him to use him as a vessel and a weapon against the Federation, as like they, in this season that they're using Picard's body. And then of course he got saved but he was reanimated, but it was interesting to see those two have an uneasy alliance. Kyle, did you have a thought?
There was another Easter egg in here because I think it's a tradition, at least in the Star Trek movies and television series. It never goes well for the Excelsior.
Yep.
If you're the Excelsior or the Reliant, just yeah. This is true. All right, guys, we have another away mission. This is the one that's the most nostalgic, and we're really excited. And as Will says on this recent episode of this week's The Ready Room, let's talk about the Enterprise D. All right, guys, we get the return not only of our original Enterprise D crew, guys, but they go back to the shipyards and we get this beautiful thing. Or I can do show and tell. Check this baby out right here.
I still have that model too.
Yeah.
Although mine is a bit yellowed compared to yours, Kevin. Good job.
Well, this one's a special one, the one I'm holding here on the video. This one actually this is the Enterprise Future Enterprise, and then you can open this up, and then put in the third nacelle, and then it can become the Enterprise D, the regular one. So beautiful ship here. Love this thing. And I thought it was kind of funny in the beginning of the season 2. People referred to it as the fat one. No one wanted the Enterprise D. I thought that was kind of funny, but I want your first reactions, guys. Now, was this good fan service? I have my answer. Scott, I'm going to start with you.
Yeah, I gave my answer earlier. This was fan service, but the good kind, because for me, it satisfied my, but there's no reason to bring it back, except there was a reason. They talked about the new interconnectivity of the existing modern fleet and how it's important that for them to have any hope, they need a ship that isn't part of all that stuff. And it's very much, Kevin, it's very much Top Gun Maverick. Because what did Maverick have to do to, save the day and get them out of, let's just call it what it is, Russia? They had to go find an old F-14 Tomcat that for some reason worked exactly the same way as it did back in the 80s. And only he knew how to start it with that, ground generator, etc. And they were able to get out of there because it worked differently than the modern jet fighters. So same deal here. They're able to use the Enterprise D because it doesn't have all the interconnectivity of the existing fleet. So fan service, absolutely. Logical within the story, sure.
Kyle, your thoughts?
Well, I immediately thought of you, Kevin, because we all know you prefer analog to digital. No, I agree with everything Scott said too. This is fan service done right, because you're using it, but it's fitting in the way they're using it in the story. Yes, it's a little bit of a science fiction trope, but it works so well in this case. And what a way to bring it back. And yes, if you're a fan of Star Trek and you didn't get some kind of emotional reaction, maybe you didn't cry, but you felt those little flutters in your heart in the middle of your chest, and you just had the goosebumps kicked in a little bit, because to see that crew on that deck was just it was what we probably, it's the culmination of everything that they've been trying to do with Picard at this point. I love the Riker comment of, has this gone smaller or have I gone bigger? Probably a little bit of both, actually, Will, but we're not gonna say that. But, and then Kevin, I got to add, you have it here on the screen, these amazing pictures that were done with each of the group shots and each of them on deck on this bridge. It's just phenomenal. Get the Kleenex, Scott. You brought it right.
I had an emotional response to this. I teared up. I'll be honest with you guys. Full disclosure. I had happy tears coming down my face. I get emotional when it comes to certain parts in movies and romantic comedies anyway. I get all mushy. But this was something different, guys. This was my Star Trek. This is what I dove into head first. I remember seeing the original Star Trek movie in the drive-in with my parents, the motion picture, fell asleep. I remember watching my mom watch the original series on television. I sat in on a lot of that, so I know who these characters were. Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan is what made me a full-time Star Trek fan. Obviously watched all the films of the original cast. But when Next Generation came on, I told myself this is going to be my Star Trek, and it always has been. And I love the Enterprise D. I love everything about it. I love the look of it, the shape of it. I loved how much bigger that it was, and that it was feared among other, enemies of the Federation. But that's what do they call it? What class ship was it again? I'm sorry, Galaxy class. It's a Galaxy class, and so it not only looked great, but it spread fear if you were going to try to attack it, And seeing the crew when we first saw them, and we see that we're presented with the ship, my first reaction was, please be well lit. Let's have a bridge that's well lit for once. Let's go back to the original Enterprise D and light that thing up like it should have been. And it wasn't as lit completely as the original series, but it was much better lit for every reason. And I love that arch in the back there, guys. And if you're listening to the podcast, please make sure you check out the video on YouTube, because then there's this great article in Variety that I'm going to get to in a sec, where I got these pictures from, where they took all these great single shots as well as the group shots of our wonderful crew here. And when I was watching the Ready Room, Jonathan Frakes was talking about how emotional it was, and how it's home. It felt like home, and everyone just couldn't believe that the creatives behind Star Trek Picard was able to make this happen. And I just wanted to mention the article I was talking about here, guys. Make sure you check it out. It's on Variety, and it's by Scott Mantz. And says, all season long, the producers of Star Trek Picard have boldly pulled out all the stops to make the third and final season for the books. And this is, again, where I got these great pictures from. To that extent, it seems like only a matter of time until we finally got to see the Enterprise. That is the Enterprise D, the Galaxy-class starship that made the first appearance in 1987 with the premiere episode of Star Trek: The Next Generation. That moment of truth finally came to an end of Vox, the 9th and penultimate episode of Season 3, when the reunited bridge crew took their stations on the Enterprise D, which turned out to be the only Federation starship capable of resisting assimilation by the powerful Borg. Executive producer Terry Matalas went through hoops to make sure history never forgot the name Enterprise.
Nice.
Speaking of variety and sharing photos of the Next Generation cast on the ship, Matalas says, everyone tried to talk us out of doing this because financially it's a nightmare and the timing was tight. To the moment we started filming, we were still gluing pieces together, but you can't have Star Trek: The Next Generation reunion without one of its major characters, which is the Enterprise. As for how it was even possible for the Enterprise D to exist after it was virtually destroyed in 1994 Star Trek Generations, only the top saucer section was still intact after crash landing on the planet Viridian 3. It turns out Jordan LaForge took it upon himself to completely restore it for the Starfleet Museum. However, despite the prominent presence of the Enterprise D bridge on the 7 seasons of the TV series that ran from 87 to 94, as well as the 94 Generations feature film, construction guidelines were scarce for production designer David Blass and art director Liz Klazowski, who spearheaded the project. Quote, there's the ongoing rumor that there's a warehouse somewhere that has all this Star Trek stuff, but what exists is not a lot, Blass said. We went into a deep dive into looking at every photo ever taken and every screen cap, and had a giant wall of inspiration at the back of the sound stage with photos in every single detail so that everyone could see what we had thought this through. Blass pivoted to another invaluable resource when we recruited Star Trek legends Mike Okuda and Denise Okuda from Herman Zimmerman's Next Generation's production design team as consultants. The Enterprise from the Next Generation was the first Enterprise on which I was the principal graphic designer, Okuda says. I got to work with Star Trek creator Gene Roddenberry on making that bridge come to life. But even with that deep dive knowledge and experience, finding the source materials to reconstruct the bridge still proved to be a daunting challenge. The first thing we did was go into the garage and dive into boxes and see what we had, Okuda says. We had some original drawings and art, but large chunks of it disappeared. You realize you are going to have to reconstruct a lot of it from scratch. And he goes on talking about the 50 people that completely rebuilt the bridge. And they went in, it was a labor of love for these guys. And I wanted to show a couple of pictures here. Give me a second here. Here we go. This here is construction, and you can see where they started with that famous arch. And that arch, which is the tactical system there, was one of the biggest hurdles, basically. And here's a little behind the scenes there and stuff like that. And on the Ready Room, they talk a lot more about this. Scott, I wanted to go to you with this. I know that there's fans out there that are trying to reconstruct this or put this original bridge back together. The only time I have ever been on this bridge was when they had the Star Trek experience in Las Vegas. Mm-hmm. And after you do your cool Star Trek experience, you get to walk onto the bridge of the Enterprise D. And back in those days, you could even rent it out and get married and stuff like that. I just wish it was still an attraction somewhere that you could go and get pictures done. To me, this is my bridge, Scott.
Yeah, it's totally my bridge too. I was 10 years old when Star Trek: The Next Generation came out, so I didn't actually start watching it right away. As I got a little bit older and I had some friends who were into it, I got into it probably around about season 3. And oh man, it just reinvigorated Star Trek for a whole new generation. My first encounter with Star Trek was when Star Trek 4 was out. For some reason, my mom thought that it was a new Star Wars movie, even though we're, totally in the wrong era. But she took me to see it and told me it was going to be a Star Wars movie. And when it came on and they were doing all this stuff with Captain Kirk and Spock and all that, I was like, well, this isn't Star Wars, but it was still really cool. And I loved it because it was spaceships and all this stuff, right? And that caused me to go seek out the original series and then eventually Star Trek The Next Generation. And so seeing that bridge on screen again and knowing that they physically built it, right? Guys, they could have really, I don't want to say cheaped out because it wouldn't be cheap, but they could have really cut corners and CGI'd everything about this. But it certainly would not have had that air of authenticity that we as Star Trek fans would have known. Okay, they're just standing around on green screens and they're projecting all this stuff. You know, we can tell that they're not interacting with the bridge the way they used to do on the original show, but rebuilding the set from scratch, come on, that is definitely a labor of love and more than just nostalgia or an homage. This is, like Kevin said, it's a tribute to what Next Generation did for the future of Star Trek. And honestly, for a lot of people out there in today's engineering and technology worlds, when they talk about how Star Trek inspired them, they're not talking about William Shatner and his version of Kirk and Spock and them. They're talking about Data and Captain Picard and Geordi and Dr. Crusher and all of those people that we watched on TV screens in syndication back in the day. And so to see them get to have their laurels, right? Their rose petals, their leis just thrown upon them by Paramount. It's so great to see Paramount take the seriousness and up it another level when it comes to this tribute to what Next Generation did and what this iconic set means for Star Trek fans.
Well, Kyle, I want to ask you, what does this set mean to you? I know you and I are Next Generation fans. I think it's your favorite Trek, or maybe it's Deep Space Nine. I haven't asked you in a while, but your thoughts on this iconic set and what they've done to recreate this.
I think that the Next Generation bridge set is the most iconic set in Star Trek history. I think it's the most identifiable. You know, you look at the original series with its bridge and how things went, and it was memorable, but it's also dated. It's also very dated. The thing with this Next Generation bridge is it holds up today because there's a lot of technology ideas that were used on the bridge that are actually technology we use today. Mm-hmm. And we're able to identify it with it. And also the aspect of, because Next Generation has never really been out of the cycle. It's whether it's been on in syndication and other channels, the DVD market, anything like that. I think Next Generation is the most identifiable. For me, I think Deep Space Nine might still be my favorite Star Trek series story-wise, because I think it's phenomenal storytelling on Deep Space Nine. But as just pure Star Trek, it is the Next Generation. Yes, I love some of the new stuff. I love Strange New Worlds. I've loved what they've done with this season of Picard. But I think for so many, and I think because I think the Next Generation has also been the hand-me-down show for our generation to our children, that this deck is, and this bridge is the most iconic, and it's stuck in so many heads and so easily identifiable as one of the most common sets in science fiction history.
Yeah, and you're so right about the original series bridge there, Kyle. I'm sorry to jump the gun here, Kevin. But
go for it.
The original series bridge was iconic, but it's been copied so many times as well. So that, like, the bridge on Strange New Worlds is very reminiscent of the original series bridge. It set
a standard. Yeah.
Yeah. Lots of non-Star Trek shows have copied the original series bridge. And then when it got time for the Defiant and then even Voyager, those are all kind of interconnected with each other. The bridges we saw in many of the Star Trek motion pictures were emulating the original series bridge. The Next Generation bridge on the Enterprise D, nobody's ever really tried to copy that because you just can't. Even the Enterprise E didn't try to do what they did with the big wooden arch and the carpet, the paneling, the inlaid, the inset of all the panels everywhere, of all the control decks everywhere. Nobody's really tried to recreate the Enterprise D bridge or even update it. They left it behind for the Enterprise E, and then the E informed the Defiant and Voyager and everything almost we've seen since. Even the bridge on Discovery and then the bridge on the newer ships within Discovery's far-flung future. None of them are trying to bring this back, right? Because they know that they just can't. It's kind of like you can't really emulate the Mona Lisa. It would be stupid to try.
Great point. The thing that I really liked about this bridge, guys, is the moments of drama that we got, the introduction of people coming down and walking down those side ramps. And one of my favorites is when Vash visits the bridge for the first time, because she kind of takes it in like a fan, even though, of course, she's crushing on Picard, and who wouldn't? But as a fan, she's just, she's sitting in the chair, she's kind of looking around. And there's all those great Q scenes on the bridge too, that it didn't just serve as a bridge to drive this vehicle, but it also served as a set with so much drama. When you compare a lot of the other Star Treks and their bridges, they seemed a little more kind of confined a little bit. Deep Space Nine was different because you had the promenade, obviously, and it was more spread out because it's like a little city. But what's cool though about this Enterprise D is that it felt spread out. It felt open, and obviously it was well lit. And there was, you could have a moment over by comms or over by the science thing, and you can think of all these famous scenes with Data, doing something, or what was the name of the robots, the 00100, the binars, right?
Yeah.
That type of thing. Or when I think it was Riker was showing the Ferengi on, they were captive, I think it was, and he was surreptitiously doing something with his left hand over on the other LCARs, just all these great little things. There were so many moments, whether it was Riker or Worf jumping over the edge of the horseshoe boomerang thing or whatever it is. And
right,
it was a great action scene, Kyle.
There's something else about this bridge too that's different than I think most any other bridge in science fiction. It's that you don't have the captain's chair above everybody else or standing out where the captain stands out in the chair. The captain is on the same level as the rest of his crew.
Great
and even
point.
the people above him, they're at stations, but the captain's chair is on the same level as the counselor's chair, the first officer's chair, the doctor, even the navigator, and where the ensign would be is so at the helm. So that's also something that makes this unique because it's on the same. It keeps everybody kind of on that same level.
So
Scott.
Beautiful, because you know that Roddenberry himself had such input on this design, because not only is the captain not elevated above everyone, he's at the same level as his officers. The people that get prominence, the crew members behind him and the ensign and the helmsman in front of him, those areas of prominence are for the everyman. They're for the lowly crewman, right? It's the communal utopia that Roddenberry always wanted Star Trek to represent and does represent even now. And so this is the graphical and visual representation of the person behind, the people behind me, the people that keep this ship running, the people that keep society functioning need to be given a position of prominence more so than the executive officer.
And also too, it was very practical, even the first officer and the counselor seat, they have those little like comm stations right next to them, and even the was it the navigation and comms panels, they would move, and then you can move them back into place. It was just really cool, and being able to see like Worf do his stuff prior to him, Tasha Yar doing his security stuff, and have them all in the same shot. And it would be nice to see like Picard turn around and address them, and then if Geordi had to come up and take over engineering controls up there, he could do that as well. I just love this set so much, guys. It's great. I definitely gush over it, guys. Well, I can't
wait till the next episode we get to see them do some stuff with the D. It's going to be great.
We have to have the Riker step over. That's all I'm saying.
Yes, Riker's got to step over the chair.
No. Even if what we need is the attempt of the step over. Maybe it doesn't quite go as well.
He's like, oh, my back. And then that would be funny. And then you have Deanna going, I told you to stop doing that at the cabin. Come on.
Yeah.
All right, guys. In a related subject, I want to talk about the Ready Room. It's okay if you haven't seen it. I'm going to spoil it for you, basically. So Jonathan Frakes and special guest Elizabeth Dennehy join Will Wheaton from of course, all of them from Next Generation to break down Star Trek Picard's penultimate episode, plus learn the history of Frontier Day and much more. So it was really cool to see Elizabeth Dennehy back. And I just want to mention that she has always been doing convention appearances. But back in the day when she started doing them, she would always say, "Oh, I hated your character so much," or "Oh, this and oh, that." But how time has changed, and as the fans have gotten older, they can kind of relate to her character a little bit more on a different level. And now it's like, I love how strong you are now, and you know how badass you were. And it was great to see Jonathan Frakes say all of that. And she says that there are several lines that she has to mention about, like the separating the saucer thing to do a diversion. She recited those lines word for word. Like she will never, ever forget those lines. Just like I think Mark Hamill can do the same thing from his first table read when he was reading for Luke Skywalker. She can do the same thing. And she messed up one line when she first started. She thought that she was going to get fired. And both Will and Jonathan were very complimentary of her, and we're so happy to have her back. I didn't know if you guys wanted to touch on having her back again. I don't know if she's still. I know she was on. Was it All My Children with what's her name that plays Ro? I know that she knew her. But she still does personal appearances and stuff like that. It was just nice to bring her back. I get that. Just wish they wouldn't have to kill her off.
Right. Yeah. It has not gone well for the returning faces to Picard this season. Let's say that.
Yeah.
This is true. So then they start talking about the Enterprise D guys, and Will jumps right into it with Jonathan. And Jonathan was on an earlier episode. I think it was episode 3 of Picard. And he was on the Ready Room and talking about, because he was directing an episode as well. But he actually brought Will onto the set. But there was a funny exchange I did want to mention. And Will, of course, like us, was overcome with emotion and was geeking out on it. And Michael Okuda, of course, here is giving the tour, so to speak. But there was a very funny moment when he's on the set of this bridge and he's talking to Michael, saying, now, and they're going to all the different stations, and you know, whether it's the comms or the tactical, and they're showing the original view and the new one. Guys, take a look at this real quick. Look how close they got to recreating this bridge. Look how
Very
amazing
close.
that is.
I think about the only thing that I would really see that stands out is a little bit of the coloring on the helms.
Yeah. I mean, it is amazing what they did.
Kevin, I want to point out too, you talk about Will Wheaton's reaction. We have to remember, this was his home. This is where he grew up, on this set. And that's like if you think about it, it's like finding out your childhood home was destroyed and then rebuilt. Yeah.
And he enters this bridge when at the beginning of this segment of the Ready Room, coming out of that turbo lift, just like his character did in the original episode that he first came onto. And I love this scene here. He's like hugging the station here. He was back home, and he was talking to Michael about how he would make these different movements. Like he knew that this was engage, and this was, you know, thrusters, and this was like setting the program, and how he worked on these movements. And Michael was impressed with how he did that. But he mentioned, and it was really funny, and I love his shirt here. It says acting ensign. But he was telling the story about how he knew he was going to visit this set, but he could not sit in the chair until he felt that he had permission. And Michael Okuda said, there is a protocol. You have to ask for permission. And I guess him and the Next Generation crew are all on a text, group text together. And he sends in that group text, I'm going to be visiting the set. may I have permission from one of you to sit in the captain's chair? And the first response he got was from Brent Spiner saying, absolutely not.
That sounds like Brent.
And then Brent came back, said, laugh out loud. Of course you can. But it was Jonathan Frakes that said, Will, you are more than welcome to sit in the captain's chair. And then after he read that text, he sat in the captain's chair. It was really, really funny. But Will is living. I'm living vicariously through Will watching this, and I highly recommend you go watch the Radio Room, this week's Radio Room, if you want more nostalgia on the history of them making this, reproducing this set, and especially the insight that Michael Okuda was giving about coming back and helping with this and talking to Gene Roddenberry about this original set and how different he wanted it and the changes they made to this as opposed to what the original Enterprise was. And, when he sits in that chair, I'm just going, oh man, I wish that was me. It was awesome, guys. I highly recommend that you check it out. But I wanted to give your guys your final thoughts on this episode, whether it's Enterprise D, maybe what you think might happen or what you might want to see in the next episode. Scott, start with you. You're our guest.
Yeah, I was convinced that Elon was not going to be the Borg, but was going to be the Wraiths from Deep Space, because we had the changelings and we had talk about stuff that happened on Deep Space Nine, and then Jack Crusher's eyes would glow red like the people that would get possessed by the Wraiths would do. So when it was the Borg, I was thrown for a little bit, but now it all kind of makes sense as I look back on this season of Picard. So I'm hoping that what will happen in the finale is that, like you said, Kevin, Jack Crusher is kind of their Frankenstein for the Borg, and I want him to turn on his creator, just like Frankenstein's monster did in that classic story. And also, I'm hoping that the Enterprise D does not get destroyed once again as part of the season finale, where it's saving the day. And maybe we will get to see some of those other museum piece starships come out of mothballs as other people have to jump in and help save the day against the Borg somehow. But yeah, this episode was just so great. It was a perfect homage and tribute, beyond homage, tribute to Star Trek The Next Generation, the Enterprise D itself, and of course its brave crew who revitalized Star Trek for a whole new generation of fans, but also are almost the foundation upon which modern day Star Trek exists.
Kyle, your thoughts? What do you think? What's going to happen? Well, I want to address to what happened in this episode, because we talked a lot over the season about fan service, and this is the ultimate version of fan service done right. It gave us this moment that was going to go down in the history of Star Trek, the return of the Next Generation crew to the Enterprise D, and it was done with class, it was done with respect, and I think it didn't feel forced, and it didn't feel like, oh, this is just a stunt thing they're doing. It fit within the story and it made sense. And I think that's so important when we look at so many things right now that try to play up on the nostalgia trip, and they just do it in a either ham-fisted way, a force-fed way, or just a way that feels like the fans are getting insulted because they are doing it poorly. And this is, like I said earlier, this is the masterclass on how to do this. And my kudos, if nothing else, we talk about this season, my kudos to the writers and the creators for doing a masterful job of paying tribute to not only the cast and crew of Star Trek The Next Generation, but to the fans as well, because they've done it intelligently and they've done it respectfully. As far as what I would like to see from the season finale upcoming, this is the time to pass the torch. Let the Next Generation crew have their moment, and then it is time to pass the torch, much like what we got a little bit in season 2 of Star Trek Discovery, where they used a phenomenal job in that season of Discovery setting up what would turn into Strange New Worlds. They have the opportunity to do something here to create a new chapter in Star Trek that fans would go bonkers for, and visit a time, like, as Kevin has said many a time, remains unexplored in Star Trek lore and needs to be explored. And I'm really hoping that they can dock the ship properly in this final episode, with closing out the story of the Next Gen crew, but bringing us a new story that will continue on this amazing legacy that these amazing actors created so many years ago and have just been so supportive of and have grown this and loved this. And I cannot wait to see what they're going to bring us in the finale. I am not going to make speculation. I'm just going to get on the Enterprise and enjoy the ride.
Well said. Before I give my final thoughts here, I did want to mention the rest of this week's The Ready Room. They also did a tribute to the original NX Enterprise and that crew, the Enterprise TV series, and kind of showing how they were the first Enterprise. And I love that series. I miss it. I wish it had a few more seasons. And they also mentioned, too, of course, the next episode is called, the 10th episode and final episode is called The Last Generation. And they did mention that next week's guest will be Terry Matalas and Jerry Ryan. Kyle, you hit it right on the head with your comments there, and you as well, Scott. And I just wanted to say that this season is basically season 8 of Star Trek Next Generation, or an extended movie that we never got. We wanted to kind of see what was going to happen after Nemesis. There was a lot of things that were presented to us, especially within relationships, Riker and Troy getting married, and among other things. We didn't get that because that movie didn't do that well, according to Paramount and box office receipts and stuff. And we were wondering if we were ever going to get this crew back together. And when Star Trek Picard was first announced, this is what we wanted. We wanted to see this. And the first 2 seasons, as we've kind of mentioned before, didn't hit a home run. They were entertaining. It was hit or miss. Wasn't exactly what we were hoping to get, but it definitely had its moments. But this is what we wanted to see. And they but not saying they promised it, but it was nice that not only did we get these characters back together in a really cool way that was written into the story, but we got one of the most important crew members and characters, and that is the Enterprise D. And like I said, it's still an emotional hit for me, and it's one of my favorite fandoms. And Scott, when we go back to the Star Trek collectible card game, it was the Next Generation that launched that. That was the license that Decipher had. And so I have so many wonderful moments of playing that first edition Star Trek, and opening up those black border packs back in the day, and trying to find those rares. And still, my favorite chase card of all time is from that alternate universe set with the ultra rare of the future Enterprise. That is, when it comes to ultra rare chase cards, that is my favorite chase of all time. And I love that card for so many reasons. And the Next Generation is what really helped launch that set and really cement my fandom in that series, because of having those cards and represented, and doing missions that were inspired by the TV series. And it holds a special place in my fandom, this Next Generation and this crew. And Terry Matalas, thank you. I hope you get more involved with Star Trek and maybe some other properties. Thank you for giving us this tribute. I don't know how this next episode's going to end. I have good faith that it will end well, and I'm really in the ride in this thing. It's this and The Mandalorian are the 2 shows that are affecting my sleeping habits. And for good reason. And I look forward to this final episode, and have been looking forward to every episode of Picard so much, because it's just done so well. And Scott, I did want to ask your opinion on one thing before we wrap this up. We talked about it in the last couple of episodes, how in television, there's a term called bottle episode. It's usually a cost-saving method of using the existing sets, not going to outside locations, and you have your core group of characters all interacting and doing something. And this season 3 of Star Trek Picard, Scott, has kind of felt like a bottle episode, because it's taken place mostly on one ship. But the writing and how big that this ship's, the Titans sets were, and how well it was done, and the drama Of course, you had Vatic and her bridge as well, but it kind of was done in a bottle episode style to where you didn't have to go to many places to get this wonderful season. Did you get that feeling well as you were watching it?
Oh, absolutely. And of course, I watched some earlier episodes of The Ready Room where they talked about Vadic's ship, the Shrike, and how the bridge for Vadic's ship is the cargo bay area of the ship that the La Serena that was in season 2 of Picard. They just redressed it and changed the way they lit it, right? They basically shot it from the other direction or whatever. And I'm like, this is old school television craftsmanship that had almost been forgotten, but it's the kind of stuff that made Star Trek survive back in the day, because, especially in the 1960s, but then also even for the next generation being in syndication, they were always scrimping and scraping by to get by on their budget, And with Picard, the first season had a huge budget because Netflix was all about it for the international market. And then when it didn't do so well, season 2 was questionable at best. And here we are, season 3, they knew that it was the final season going into it. So budget, what budget? Compared to something like The Mandalorian or Andor, it's like, what the heck? But these guys are so creative. And you see, they brought back all these old hands like Michael Okuda and friends that knew how to get things done without a budget that, was astronomical. And so they've reused and reshot and relit all these sets and made it, like you said, Kevin, it's really a bottle episode because we're not on location. We're not changing to a bunch of other starships. We're not going over to the Klingon bridge to fight them or whatever. We have everything happening almost in the same corridors, just shot in different angles. And when you have to get creative like that, it means your script has to be just top notch because you can't hide behind the fancy stuff or the fancy scenery. And they haven't been. They've been doing a great job. They're just knocking it out of the park because necessity is the mother of invention. And even the scenes where Lore and Data have their final face-offs, it was just Brent Spiner standing on one set talking to himself, Yeah. But it was just mind-blowing stuff about how we are the summation of our memories, and this is what can help change people by helping them understand the person they're competing against or whatever. Classic Star Trek philosophy and classic Star Trek budget or lack thereof.
Well said. All right, guys, we're going to go ahead and warp on out of here and just to have a quick look at the Orb of Prophecy. All right. So first of all, thank you guys. You've been watching Star Trek Picard, season 3, episode 9, Vox. We've been discussing it here on the Union Federation podcast on the Fandom Podcast Network. And we're going to look at the Orb of Prophecy here, guys. As we know, coming up, we have Star Trek Picard finishing next week. Final episode, final season. And of course, just recently announced, Strange New World Season 2 is to be released on June 15th, 2023. Scott, what is your thoughts on Strange New Worlds? And what's your excitement factor?
Oh, it's out of 10 because out of 10 because I love Star Trek Strange New Worlds. I've been a Captain Pike fan for a while. Really loved Bruce Greenwood's interpretation of him in Star Trek 2009 and so forth. But I also have loved the idea of the character, and Anson Mount has just been great as him. He almost seemed to fully inhabit the uniform from the second he put on the yellow one. I wasn't a huge fan of the Pike that we got much of in Star Trek Discovery, although he was interesting, very good part of that show. But when he's wearing that yellow tunic, Anson Mount seems to just become Captain Pike. It's an extension of his own personality almost. And I can say almost the same thing about the rest of the crew of the bridge there on the Enterprise in Strange New Worlds. And having Spock around for a manly man captain like Pike to bounce off of has been great. I can't wait to see them introducing more of the original series characters. And then I also am just so excited that they're getting a season 2, and I can't wait to see what they do with the story of Una, number 1.
Nice. Well, also, we have Lower Deck Season 4 to release later this summer, Prodigy Season 2 to release in the winter season, and Discovery, its final and 5th season next year in 2024. And of course, just recently announced we are getting Star Trek Starfleet Academy series has been put into order by Paramount Plus. All right, guys, let's go ahead and let's get into subspace signals and wrap things up. This is Union Federation Podcast on the Fandom Podcast Network, where we discuss both Star Trek and the Orville. Please make sure, if you aren't already, if you're listening to this, make sure you check us out on YouTube and subscribe to the Fandom Podcast Network, where you will be getting these YouTube videos of the Union Federation. We also have some older episodes where we're talking about the Orville as well, so make sure you check that out. Our master feed for all of our audio podcasts can be found on Podbean at fpnet.podbean.com. And also make sure you check out our Facebook group, Union Federation Podcast Facebook group. Get in there where we are talking about Star Trek and the Orville. You can also follow us, Union Federation, on Twitter and Instagram. If you'd like to contact us directly, you can hail us at theunionfederation@gmail.com. My name is Kevin Reitzel. I am on Twitter and Instagram at Spartan_Phoenix. Kyle, where can we find you?
Well, first of all, I am channeling my inner Haley Oracle because I am predicting a moment in next week where we all scream "No" when the words "Deanna, take the helm" are said in the episode. But you can find me when I'm free from Planetaxium on Twitter at AKyleW or on Instagram at AKyleFandom.
You can also find Haley on Twitter at Trekkie01D and Amy on Twitter at Miss Amy Nelson. Our special guest ambassador, Mr. Scott Botman, where can we find you on social media?
So I'm on Facebook under my real name, Scott Botman. Of course, you can find me on Twitter whenever I bother to deal with the dumpster fire that is Twitter these days, at ScotticusMax. And you can check out my author website where I do write my own science fiction novels at writegreatscott.com. And you can find me on the Fandom Podcast Network as a co-host of What a Piece of Junk, the Star Wars podcast here on the FPN.
You guys have been doing a deep dive into Mandalorian this season. Are you guys excited for the final episode?
Very excited, very worried that a certain character may turn out to be a turncoat. So hope that doesn't happen, but no spoilers here.
We are also teaming up with the BQN, Amy's network over there of wonderful Star Trek programming. Make sure you check them out and their Facebook group. They will be back. And guys, I want to thank you very much for discussing Star Trek Picard this week. We got one more episode. I am really looking forward to it. I can't wait. To quote Riker, I think we should boldly get the hell out of here. Until next week, hailing frequencies are now closed.